For centuries, Western philosophy operated on a single, strict metric to determine who deserved moral consideration: human rationality. The Greek philosopher Aristotle formalized this standard. He concluded that since non-human animals lack the capacity to reason, their purpose is entirely subservient to human needs. René Descartes extended this logic, categorizing living animals as mere biological machines, devoid of reason and incapable of internal feeling. This diagram illustrates the resulting status quo. If an entity did not possess human-level rationality, it was locked outside the moral circle, categorized alongside plants and inanimate tools. Modern ethics has completely fractured that baseline. Today, the debate in philosophy isn't whether animals belong inside the moral circle, but rather which logical framework justifies their inclusion. The initial challenge to the anthropocentric model came from the 18th century philosopher Jeremy Bentham. Bentham argued that evaluating an animal based on its intellect missed the point. The relevant question, he wrote, is not can they reason or can they talk, but can they suffer? This established a new metric. Moral consideration would no longer be gated by intelligence, but by the biological capacity to experience pain. Shifting the variable from rationality to sentience invalidates the Descartes model. It forces society to mathematically account for the harm inflicted on any creature capable of feeling it. That mathematical approach is championed today by utilitarian philosopher Peter Singer, who popularized the concept of speciesism. Singer identifies speciesism as an arbitrary prejudice. It values an entity based on its classification rather than its biological reality, equating the logic to racism or sexism. To correct this, Singer relies on a biological baseline for moral inclusion: the presence of a central nervous system. A central nervous system provides objective proof of sentience. It confirms an organism possesses the physical hardware required to experience pain and stress. This scale maps entities based on central nervous system complexity. Non-sentient organic life sits at the bottom, while complex mammals occupy the upper tiers. For these upper entities, Singer's utilitarian calculus demands that our actions must minimize the total harm input. Singer does outline a boundary condition known as the necessity exception. In a genuine survival scenario, consuming an animal is permissible. But when we factor survival necessity into the modern calculus, we find a different reality. With abundant alternatives, the equation demands reducing total suffering. Singer's utilitarianism permits philosophical trade-offs and hierarchies, provided overall harm is mathematically minimized across all sentient life. The philosopher Tom Regan rejects this model, arguing that Singer's mathematical trade-offs are logically flawed. Regan argues that utilitarianism reduces living beings to biological receptacles, containers whose only value is the measurement of pleasure and pain they happen to hold. This diagram illustrates Regan's counter-architecture. Instead of a vertical hierarchy, living beings exist on a horizontal plane, each possessing an intrinsic value he classifies as being the subject of a life. To qualify, an entity must possess specific internal traits: memory, expectations, and a subjective experience. Meeting these criteria grants an animal an independent moral status. Its value is divorced from its utility to human beings. Regan's framework establishes a moral boundary. A subject of a life has a right to exist and cannot be treated merely as a means to an end. A third framework, neo-Aristotelian virtue ethics, approaches the problem from a different angle. Instead of analyzing the biological rights of the animal, this framework shifts the focus entirely onto the human actor. The objective here is the moral development and character cultivation of the individual making the choice. Under this lens, exploiting animals is rejected because the act itself fails to cultivate essential human traits. It bypasses the compassion, maturity, and sensitivity required of a moral citizen. Virtue ethics mandates animal welfare not by calculating the biology of the victim, but by enforcing the requirement to build a moral human society. Despite these frameworks, society relies on several intuitive arguments to maintain the anthropocentric status quo. One of the most common is the naturalistic fallacy, the assumption that because animals eat other animals in the wild, humans are biologically justified in doing the same. This illustrates David Hume's is-ought problem. Observing the biological reality of a food chain, what is, does not provide a logical foundation for what humans ought to do. Another intuitive defense attempts to equate the harvesting of crops to the slaughter of animals. This diagram applies Peter Singer's biological baseline to that claim. The comparison fails because plants lack the central nervous system required to experience pain. While these intuitive defenses feel culturally comfortable, they fail under rigorous logical and biological scrutiny. A sharp disconnect exists between these categorical philosophical frameworks and the requirements of daily human pragmatism. To address this, philosopher Michael Shermer proposes a concept called reducitarianism. Reducitarianism is a step-based approach to modifying habits. It bypasses the demand for ideological purity or the immediate elimination of all animal products. This approach focuses on the directional vector of reducing harm, rather than adhering to an all-or-nothing binary. Ethical progress is often incremental. This approach utilizes the utilitarian calculus to reduce total suffering within the bounds of a pragmatic society. This matrix compares the three distinct mechanics we've explored: Singer's calculation of suffering, Reagan's defense of intrinsic subjecthood, and the virtue ethics focus on character cultivation. Despite relying on different internal mechanics, all three logical frameworks converge on a single outward vector, expanding the moral circle to encompass non-human sentient life. Ethical rigor requires us to examine the specific criteria we use to define the moral circle, and to question the biological or philosophical justification for where we draw the line.